Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. With just over a month remaining until South Korea's June 3rd snap presidential election, the political landscape has taken another dramatic turn. The Supreme Court has overturned the appellate acquittal of Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung in his election law violence case with a new ruling that effectively signals a guilty outcome. While such a verdict could have disqualified his candidacy, the final judgment is not expected before Election Day, allowing Lee to remain in the race for now. Meanwhile, former Acting President Han Duck-soo has officially resigned today and is expected to declare his candidacy tomorrow. His entry could trigger a last-minute conservative realignment, especially as the People Power Party is set to confirm its nominee later this week. So as parties gear up to finalize their candidates, we take a closer look at the prospects of the upcoming snap election. And for this, we are joined in the studio by Hans Schadl, Professor of Political Science at Yonsei University. Welcome, Professor.
Hi, Mok-yeon. Nice to see you.
And also joining us online is Choi Hyun-sun, Professor of Public Administration at Myeongji University. Great to have you.
Good evening, Mok-yeon. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So, let's begin our discussion with Professor Schadl. The Supreme Court's full bench today overturned the second trial not guilty verdict for DP presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung, who was indicted on charges of violating the Public Official Election Act. Now, this case has now been remanded for a new ruling with the implication of guilt. Could you walk us through what this actually means for his presidential candidacy moving forward, and what the legal and political consequences could he face if the appeals court returns with a guilty verdict?
Well, it certainly puts a damper on Lee Jae-myung's presidential ambitions, doesn't it? Because until today, the public opinion polling, anyway, has suggested that Lee Jae-myung would be way out in front of any of the potential candidates from former President Yoon's party, the PPP. And we can talk more in a bit about those candidates, but Lee Jae-myung was going into this court decision with a 46% likability or approval rating, and we don't yet know how this court decision is going to affect that. If the Seoul High Court, which is the lower court that will now have to look at this case once again and come up with a verdict, and it seems all indications will be that the verdict will have to be guilty, if they were somehow to put that verdict together before the election, and the fine that would be imposed on Lee Jae-myung, I believe if it were over 1 million won, then he would be disqualified from running for the presidency. And he could even be disqualified with a lower verdict as well, a verdict that would be just simply 1 million won. There's some differences of interpretation in the press as to what would be the threshold that would disqualify him. And then the length of time in which he could be disqualified from running for any future office is also, it could either be 5 years or 10 years, depending on the circumstances. In any case, the presidential election is June 3rd. It doesn't seem likely that the High Court is going to come out with a decision before the election, which means this will really be out in the court of public opinion, and it will be in the election campaign. Assuming that Lee Jae-myung stays in the race, which seems to be the early indication, the Democratic Party seems to be standing resolutely behind him. In fact, to me, the DP almost sounds a little bit like President Trump in the U.S. these days, and his supporters attacking the courts. This one, the DP has been already leveling accusations against the courts, suggesting that this should be decided by the people. So it's going to be up to the people to decide if Lee Jae-myung is still fit to be the president, and whether he's a fairly safe bet or whether he is now a risky candidate. And let's keep in mind here that 2 of the last 3 presidents in South Korea have had to have been removed from power early after being impeached. So I would think there are going to be quite a few voters, maybe even some swing voters, that are going to be asking the question as June 3rd approaches, do we really want to be at risk of going through yet another impeachment or yet another removal of a president or a constitutional dispute if some sort of legal judgment were to come down the road against Lee Jae-myung if he were to be the president and if the courts were to rule against him after he takes office, because that's what might end up happening, right? The Seoul High Court will likely have its decision after Lee Jae-myung becomes the president. And then there are all sorts of constitutional questions right there. It's Article 84 as to what kind of liability a president would have in the event of a court verdict against the president, a conviction really. So there's going to be a lot of unanswered questions right through the campaign as long as Lee Jae-myung is the candidate, and we'll see how all that plays out.
Right, so it will be for the people actually to decide on election day to, get the risks or not. Now, let's also move on to Professor Che. So also today, former Acting President Han Duck-soo has submitted his resignation from office, and he's also expected to announce his candidacy by tomorrow. And it's widely expected that he'll align with the PPP. Now, yet the party's nominee will only be finalized this Sunday. How do you interpret the timing, and what's the most likely scenario that could unfold around a possible conservative unity ticket?
Yeah, I think our prime minister today resigned, and the former prime minister Han Duck-soo's timing seems very deliberate. By stepping in right now, before the PPP picks its own nominee, he's likely, maybe Han Duck-soo likely to hoping to present himself as a unifying option, especially with the conservative side still divided. I think that May 1st, today is a very special day because one candidate from the DP now found guilty, convicted by the Supreme Court, and one strong, maybe possible candidate, Han Duck-soo, resigned today, and he will announce his candidacy for this president, the election. So I think we must remember this May 1st. I think his future, maybe if there are no clear front runner emerges in the Conservative Party, maybe there are chance maybe top party could rally around him. But things are so moving so fast. So I think it's a timing issue. Probably now the Kim Mun-soo and Han Dong-un is still learning, and they are very strong candidate. Also, Han Duck-soo is a very strong candidate. So I think that depending on the who support, those people who support the Conservative Party, and then I think under the rule of our elections, it must be decided before the May 7th, which is Han Duck-soo still can be the candidate of the PPP or not.
Mm-hmm. So let's stay with this conservative unity ticket, Professor Shattle. PPP candidate Kim Mun-soo expressed before he has expressed his openness to this unification effort, while his rival Han Dong-hun has been dismissing speculation of merging with Han Duck-soo. So if this push for unification actually fails before the candidate registration deadline, what do you think, what kind of an impact would this have on the competitiveness of this conservative bloc?
Well, here it's going to be up to the People Power Party to figure out which way they want to go and which candidate might be the strongest, or at least until at least today, I'd say at least the least likely to be a weak candidate. All three of the prospects, if I go and look at the public opinion pollings, for now, for the PPP possibilities, or Han Duck-soo running as an independent, suggests that the numbers are actually quite weak compared to Lee Jae-myung. Han Duck-soo was the strongest of the three challengers to Lee Jae-myung, but even there, the chances were quite slim. Lee Jae-myung's chances are quite high of winning the election regardless of who the opposition would be. So it's almost as if we need a whole new set of public opinion polls now. If Lee Jae-myung is damaged, how will Han Duck-soo, how will Han Dong-hun, how will Kim Mun-soon, each of them perform against this reshaped race, perhaps, now that Lee Jae-myung has the legal cloud over his head? Han Duck-soo is the sitting acting president until midnight tonight. He's been the prime minister. He was also the ambassador to the U.S. under the Lee Myung-bak presidency. He was also a former prime minister in the No Mo-yeon government. So he's seen as somebody who's quite established in politics. He's now elderly, but so is Donald Trump. I think if Korean voters are thinking back to the 2022 election, when they were looking for a president who could strengthen ties with the U.S. And if Korea is in a position now where maintaining ties with the U.S. or dealing with the Trump presidency might be a big consideration, then Han Duck-soo might have some advantages. On the other hand, he'll be connected in the minds of some voters with former President Yoon Suk-yeol. Even though Han distanced himself from the martial law bid, there'll be voters who will still associate him with that. I think that makes Han Dong-hoon an interesting candidate from the PPP side. He's been the stronger of the two compared to him versus Kim Moon-soo. On the other hand, though, you have Yoon Suk-yeol's faction that still holds it against Han Dong-hoon for voting in favor of stopping the martial law bid, supporting the impeachment bid for President Yoon. Han Dong-hoon really broke away decisively from Yoon, and that's interesting because Han was a career prosecutor. And Han was a very close friend of Yoon's going into the Yoon presidency. So many people on the Yoon wing of the party, and those folks still vote, they view Han as somebody who betrayed the party quite critically. So that's a liability for Han Dong-hoon going forward, and whether the voters want to have another former prosecutor as a president too, as opposed to a career politician. So there's a lot of gamesmanship and kind of strategic calculation that the PPP will have to try to do to figure out which way is going to be the best foot forward for them now against Lee Jae-myung.
Right, so a lot of internal calculus to make. Well, Professor, thank you so much for, giving us a background of each scenario. Now, let's also take a look at the policy battlefield that's available so far. Many of the leading promises, particularly around youth debt relief, AI education, and housing subsidies, are highly expansive. Professor Che, are we seeing some credible fiscal roadmap from either side?
I think there are big plans, big promise now that emerged, but neither side has shown, like the PPP and DP, shown yet a clear plan for how they can make the money for these big plans. I think for youth in South Korea, maybe they want to see the candidate who can maybe promising about the transform the hell Joseon from the hell Joseon to the Korea tomorrow. I think that those are three important maybe policy things stuff is very important for them. I think the Lee Jae-myung of the candidate of the DP, he proposed creating a national AI fund. That's very interesting because it is a good model about private and public partnership, and that kind of fund is maybe possibly we have some kind of shortage of our national budget, so I think it can compromise some of the issue. Also, so PPP, People's Power Party, talking about the tax breaks and the private funding, which is also very interesting. I think both parties showing a little bit about how can they make the realistic plan, but still we need to wait how they proceed. Their some the promise is coming on. Also, I think still experts and maybe even the international organization like IMF still there are some warning. We don't have enough budget. These big promise. So I think we need more time. Still waiting. Yeah.
Right. So these promises seem ambitious, but we'll really have to see if they would be supported by some funding, actually. Now, former Acting President Han Duck-soo is actually expected to formally propose a shortened presidential term as part of his constitutional reform plan policy. Professor Shuttle, what is the political logic behind the term reduction, and how might this differentiate him from DP candidate Lee Jae-myung, who has so far been kind of cautious about constitutional amendment?
Well, I think Han, again, I can't read his mind, but I think he may be calculating that the PPP is extremely discredited right now following Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. And as the impeachment debate and the ongoing debate over whether the court would have ultimately removed Yoon from office was ongoing, which it did, There was a lot of talk about looking ahead and whether the presidency is too powerful. There's been debate for years here as to whether having a one-term presidency is still a good idea. There's a lot of arguments that a single-term presidency, turns into a lame duck presidency all too early in the game, that even though the term's 5 years, sometimes after a year and a half or 2 years, the honeymoon is over and the president finds it hard to get anything done. So this really predates the situation the country's in right now. I think ever since I've been teaching at Yonsei in 2008, there's been talk about, are we ready for a two-term presidency here, more like the US, perhaps 2 4-year terms. So I don't think Han Duck-soo has committed to any definite horizon for how the reshaped presidential term would be. But I think he's also looking at the fact that he'd be coming into the presidency basically coming from the same political party for the time being anyway as the outgoing president, the impeached president, unless he were again to run as an independent. But even if he were to run as independent, that would further strengthen the case he would try to make that he's just going to be a caretaker, an honest broker of sorts that's going to try to put the country's presidency on a different footing, stabilize things after a series of difficulties with past presidents, and that he would get out early. And I don't think the end point for his term is yet set in stone, but it could be 2028, it could be even shorter. He would be in office simply to shepherd through some constitutional reform, and then there'd be another election going forward with this new set of arrangements. Whereas the DP, they're going to stick more to the status quo at this point. Lee Jae-myung, as you point out, he's not been talking about constitutional reform. And I think that's partly because the DP is currently dominant in the assembly. If they get into the Blue House, well, it's not the Blue House anymore. It could be the Blue House again. But if they get back into the presidency at that point, they'll have the upper hand in both the executive and the legislative branch, and then they can chart out any kind of constitutional change, if any, as they see fit later on. So absent any driving policy force that otherwise would lead to support for Han Duck-soo, that might be a way that he would try to distinguish himself from everybody else in the pack. Even if the PPP were to not get behind him and leave him as an independent, he could still try to be a kind of third-party candidate or neutral candidate in that regard. So all very much in flux.
So we'll have to see how this would resonate to voters. Now, let's also touch upon this 4.5-day work week. Professor Che, the DP envisions a long-term shift towards a 4-day model, while the PPP proposes redistributing working hours. So from a public administration standpoint, Professor, how realistic is this for the government to oversee such a rollout across sectors with, vastly different labor structures?
First of all, I love 4-day work. So probably I support that. The problem is it is not simple because the structure of the jobs in our society is complicated. Like a office worker, probably much easier, but how about the factories and the hospitals? Maybe there are big changes we need to apply 4 days and the 4.5 days work. I think that this is a long-term plan, not the short. Also, I'm not sure about the distribution of the time is working for the 4.5 days. Also, DP's 4 days work is, there are a lot of the change, the institutional change we need, like labor laws, how companies were following or rules, and help how we can help the smaller business, like that. So I think this is a big issue. Also, I think maybe it could make more wide labor market inequality. Okay, so the white collar and the employee of the big company in public sector could have a more benefit. But however, some of the like unstable jobs or the manufacturing jobs will maybe maybe they can suffer more about this issue. So I think we should be very careful. I think the long-term change, step by step, and change the laws, and we must see the pilot test first, and then we could apply in the nationwide. So I think it's a timing issue. Maybe they can promise, but I'm sure it take like 10 years, something like that. Yeah.
Right, so actual implementation would be actually not that easy, especially for various industries like smaller employers and public sector planning. Now, recently, there was a survey by the Korea Manifesto Center on the top 10 issues for voters in this election. And for the first time, restoring fairness and trust in institutions has ranked higher than, economic issues like jobs or housing. Professor Shadow, what does this shift actually tell us about the psychological and political mood of the electorate?
Right, Mok-yeon. I think it tells us voters are tired. And that voters have had 2 impeachments, again, to deal with in the past 10 years, both of which posed real crises to the country's constitutional democracy. Thankfully, the Constitution and the democracy withstood these 2 crises. I think they really want to go forward in a way that's going to be productive and fruitful. It goes back to what we were saying a little bit earlier. I think this election, voters are really not going to want to send somebody into the presidency that's a high risk for impeachment again, or in danger of having yet another crisis emerge on that president's watch. And I suspect also that voters have noticed the infighting to the point of paralysis between the presidency and the assembly over the past couple of years. And I suspect voters might want, again, I can't speak for the Korean people, but the polling data seems to tell us that the voters want the president and the assembly members to be more effective at working out negotiations and compromises. And all these policy goals that Professor Che was just talking about that can be stymied in a deadlock between the legislature and the assembly. In some ways, we're going to be talking really about the same kind of fundamental issues that voters were thinking about in 2022. How to make housing more affordable, how to make it more feasible economically to raise children in this society, how to fix the education system so teenagers don't burn out, how to help young adult underemployment and so forth. And if there's paralysis in the 2, policy-making institutions of the government, again, the executive and the legislative branch, things don't get done. So I think the public wants the system to have integrity for its own sake, but also so some favorable directions can be taken in public policies that will help the quality of life here.
Right, so voters are really searching for, to restore their trust with the government, and whoever captures that would be able to, take the country's next political chapter. Now, we will have to wrap up our program at this point tonight. Thank you so much for your insights and for your time, Professor Shadow.
Thank you for having me, Mok-yeon.
Thank you so much. And of course, Professor Che, we appreciate it.
It was very nice. Yeah, thank you very much.
Now, that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.